Welcome to FlightGlobal Focus. My name is Amber Elias, and joining me for this News Focus episode is David Kaminski-Morrow, FlightGlobal's air transport editor. Hi, David.
Hello, Amber.
Let's take a look at the top aviation stories this week on FlightGlobal. North Korea marked its Air Force's 80th anniversary with a display featuring various aircraft and UAVs, which were carrying munitions visually resembling those used by South Korea or Western forces. Analysts warn the display may be propaganda rather than proof of capability, as Pyongyang's Air Force is comprised of obsolescent Soviet-era types that would fare poorly in action. Norwegian investigators believe an unspecified maintenance issue was the likely cause of an in-flight engine failure on a Sikorsky S-92 helicopter. The incident occurred 6 minutes after takeoff from an offshore platform on 5 June 2023. All 12 T-bolts had fractured due to fatigue and caused the uncommanded in-flight shutdown, the report states. China Airlines has approved acquisition of up to 18 widebody Airbus and Boeing aircraft, including 5 A350-1000s, 5 777-9s, 4 777-8Fs, and 2 777Fs. The airline is also planning to sell 4 747-400 freighters as part of a fleet modernization effort intended to replace aging aircraft and boost efficiency. European regulators have issued an emergency directive after a recent event involving an Airbus A320 revealed that high solar radiation may corrupt data in flight control systems, causing a brief, uncontrolled descent. The fix targets the A320 jets, whose computers could be vulnerable to intense space weather. David, 2025 has been a mixed year for safety. It didn't start well. There was the mid-air collision between the CRJ and military Black Hawk helicopter over Washington, D.C., and then in June, there was also the first loss of a Boeing 787 with the Air India accident. How has the industry responded to these events?
Well, Amber, I think the Washington accident was particularly shocking, not just because the industry has become used to the intervention of the traffic collision avoidance system, which has all but eliminated mid-air collisions, but also because the US transport system has had such an extraordinary airline safety record in recent years. It's been down to almost single-figure fatalities for several years running. But the Washington accident, I think, highlighted the risks associated with integrating civil and military traffic in the same busy airspace in the US Capitol. And one of the early findings from that was the realization that such conflicts were happening frequently and notably at night. And there was an urgent need to deconflict the airline and military helicopter traffic over the Potomac. And that's probably been the main reaction so far. But I think what's clear is that it's been a fairly transparent inquiry, despite having a military element to it. And you can contrast that with the investigation into the Air India accident, which I think has been far more obscure. It's become mired in controversy because initial indications seem to suggest one of the pilots cut off the fuel supply to the engines just after takeoff. And that's proven to be highly contentious. There's a kind of a clash of cultural taboos. The judiciary has become involved. It's really overshadowing the work of the investigation. And other than a few precautionary checks, the industry hasn't really reacted to the Air India event because at the moment, I think we're still in the dark. There's nothing really clear to react to.
Boeing has come under a lot of safety scrutiny in recent years. Has the Air India accident added to that pressure?
I think Boeing's been under pressure certainly since the 737 MAX grounding, and of course the Alaska Airlines door plug incident last year, and an accident involving the 787, which I think is still perceived as a fairly new aircraft, was really the last thing it needed, especially if you'll recall just before the Paris Air Show this happened. And you'll remember that Boeing kept a fairly low profile at Paris as a result. But I think it's interesting that in regard to Air India, none of the world's regulators has ordered a suspension of 787 operations. I mean, less than a week after the MD-11 freighter crash in Louisville in November, the MD-11 fleet was grounded. And you had a few days ago the discovery of a weakness in flight control software at Airbus resulted in this emergency grounding of thousands of Airbus A320s. But there's been no similar action against the 787, and I think that probably says a great deal.
And you mentioned the UPS MD-11 freighter crash. Now, the MD-11 isn't a new model like the 787. It's actually an older design. But what might that mean for the air cargo industry?
Well, we talked earlier about the superb safety record in the US air transport industry of late. And I'm unfortunately old enough to remember the worst US accident, which was the American Airlines DC-10 crash in Chicago way back in 1979. And the most startling thing about the MD-11 event was its at least external similarity, the physical shedding of the whole engine from the wing on takeoff. And at the moment, there's no evidence that those two accidents share any deeper commonality. But the MD-11 has been nevertheless grounded, just the same way the DC-10 was 45, 46 years ago. And it's not clear when or how that grounding is going to be lifted. The MD-11 is still in use, not just by UPS, also by FedEx and one or two other carriers. And its absence is obviously going to cause disruption to the schedules in the short term. The real question, I think, is whether any problem identified by the inquiry can be fixed economically, given the age of those airframes.
Yeah, absolutely. It does feel like some of the problems with safety this year, as you said, with the Air India crash, there hasn't been a grounding of the Boeing 787s, which, as you say, says a lot about the investigation and what we could speculate went wrong there. Are we looking at any other major safety changes into 2026?
Well, safety is still exceptionally good in the industry. I think one of the other issues that's been prominent this year is the need to reinforce pressure setting procedures, because one of the most serious accidents this year has been the Antonov 24 accident in eastern Russia in May. And that seems to have resulted from pilots not setting the correct pressure reference during descent, with the result that your instruments then end up giving you inaccurate information on your altitude. But that's not an issue just confined to Russia. There's been several serious occurrences with Western operators in the last couple of years, sometimes simply down to mishearing the correct pressure setting when it's relayed by air traffic control. And that's stirred enough concern within EASA, the European safety regulator, to remind crews that checking pressure references is vital. I mean, it's old school stuff, but it shows that safety it's an ongoing process, and even sort of basic stuff needs to be continually reminded about, if you like, to keep up that safety record.
Would you say that 2025 has been a bad year for safety overall?
No, I don't think so. I think air travel still has an enviable record for safety. I think serious incidents, they draw a lot of attention, especially in today's world with everyone has a phone camera, everyone has social media. So I think you become much more aware of what's going on. But it's still disproportionate when you compare it with the vast number of uneventful flights. So if you are flying anywhere over the holiday season, then I think it's best to sit back and enjoy it and not stress yourself.
Absolutely. And on that, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of FlightGlobal Focus, David.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Amber.
FlightGlobal Focus is your essential podcast for trusted aviation insight. We publish new episodes twice weekly. Join us on Friday for a concise news briefing and on Monday for in-depth analysis covering airlines, defense, and aerospace. FlightGlobal Focus is a production of FlightGlobal with audio editing by Lucy Johnson. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or for commercial opportunities, please email podcast@flightglobal.com, and more information can be found in the show notes. Listeners can get a discount to a new subscription to FlightGlobal with the code FGPodcast. Terms and conditions apply. If you listen on Spotify, leave us a comment and let us know what you think of the show, and if there are any topics you want our journalists to look into. Listen, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.